Hello Americans channel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
A farmer was fed up with illegal parking on his land. His revenge was epic. Eli stood at the edge of his field, boots buried in soft ruined soil. Deep tire tracks cut through his crops like scars, fresh and deliberate. It wasn't just carelessness anymore, it was disrespect. His fists tightened at his sides. They'd crossed a line, and now something had to be done. He looked at the shattered stems of his young corn, the broken irrigation pipe, the tire still lodged half an inch into his wife's flower. His heart thudded not from rage but from a cold creeping certainty. He'd tried signs, he'd tried asking. No one had listened, but now they would. By sunrise the next morning, Eli would be out in his field again, not to plead, not to protest, but to take back what was his with quiet determination, iron resolve, and a plan so petty, so perfect, it just might restore the peace he'd lost. Eli Bauer had always believed in the honesty of land. If you put in the hours, fed it, tilled it, spoke to it even when no one was around, it would repay you in kind. He wasn't the sort of man who needed much to be happy. A strong cup of coffee, a clean pair of boots, and a stretch of blue sky over his fields, that was enough. He lived just outside of town on a patch of farmland passed down from his grandfather, who'd once farmed the land with nothing but a mule and his own grit. Over the years, the tools changed. Eli now used a tractor instead of a mule, and the old barn had electricity running through it, but the soul of the land remained the same. His wife, Margaret, had grown up in the same county. They'd met at a church potluck, bonded over their mutual dislike of sweet pickles, and had been inseparable ever since. While Eli tended to the crops, Margaret cared for the garden and the house. She was precise in everything, her cooking, her sewing, her rose pruning, but never harsh. There was a stillness to her that grounded Eli when the world got too noisy. Every morning, Eli took his rounds. He walked the border of the fields, checked on the soil, examined the young corn shoots, and paused near the chicken coop to scatter feed. On most days, Margaret would wave at him from the garden, wearing a sun hat that had faded over decades and gloves that never seemed to wear out. Their life was a quiet one, but in that quiet lived a deep contentment. They had no children, no modern distractions, no desire to leave the land they had built their life upon. The town had always respected that distance to Eli's farm was just far enough from the main road to feel secluded, and most people in town simply forgot it was there. But everything changed when the Silver Mart opened next door. It started with flyers, bright orange ones stuffed into mailboxes and pinned to grocery store boards. Grand opening Silver Mart Superstore. Eli didn't think much of it. Another store was just another place he didn't need to go, but Margaret had been curious. It might save us the long trip into town, she'd said, placing the flyer on the kitchen table. They say they've got everything: groceries, tools, even gardening supplies. Eli nodded, skeptical, but when the opening day rolled around, they drove over in the pickup truck. It was a massive building, soulless and gray, with parking lines as far as the eye could see. Inside, it was loud and bright and filled with people from all corners of the county. Still, it wasn't all bad. Eli found a new spade and a set of gloves that looked sturdier than his current ones. Margaret wandered the seed aisle for what felt like ages before picking out a packet of rare pink forget-me-not seeds. She looked at them like they were treasures. "These were my mother's favorite," she said softly, holding the packet as though it might crumble. Eli smiled. "Then let's get you a patch of your own." They returned home with a trunk full of supplies and a sense of unexpected satisfaction. Maybe the store wasn't such a bad thing after all. The very next morning, as Eli made his way toward the southern field, something strange caught his eye: a small silver car half tucked into the edge of his property. The soil was damp from a light rain the night before, and the car's tires had left deep impressions in the earth. It wasn't hard to figure out what had happened. The Silver Mart parking lot had overflowed, and someone, maybe in a rush, maybe just lazy, had decided Eli's field looked like a convenient alternative. He walked up slowly, brushing his fingers over the crop stems nearby. Some were flattened. Others would recover. Still, irritation prickled in his chest. He stood nearby for a while, arms folded, until the driver, a young man in a hoodie, came out of the store, heading for the vehicle. "Morning," Eli called out. The man jumped slightly, surprised. "Oh, hey, you know this is private land, right?" Eli said, not unkindly. "Not really a place to be parking." The driver looked around as if noticing the field for the first time. "Oh, sorry man, I didn't know, the store lot was full." Eli nodded. "Happens. Just don't let it happen again." Yeah, of course, the man said, climbing into his car. With a wave and a vague apology, he drove off. Eli stood there for another minute before walking back toward the house. Margaret was trimming the rose bushes, her gloves muddy. Someone parked down by the corn, Eli said, told him to move. She didn't stop working, and he apologized, said the lot was full. Margaret looked up then, her eyes narrowing just a bit. They'll come back, she said. Eli shrugged. Maybe not, but even as he said it, he didn't quite believe it. The next few days passed without incident. Eli almost began to believe that the lone silver car had been a one-off moment of poor judgment by a single impatient shopper. But then came Saturday. It was just past 10 in the morning when Eli stepped out with his coffee and spotted them, 3 cars, not one, now scattered along the edge of his southern field. One had pulled in so deeply that it was nearly touching the irrigation trench. The tires had churned up soft soil, leaving thick clods of earth in their wake. He rubbed a hand over his beard and muttered, well, hell, it wasn't just the presence of the cars, it was their boldness. These weren't cautious edge parkers, these were people who had decided his land was fair game, like it was a public lot that just hadn't been paved yet. Margaret joined him a few minutes later, holding a small pot of the newly sprouted forget-me-nots. More of them. Yep, Eli said, not taking his eyes off the field. She sighed and turned back toward the garden. Then it's only going to get worse. That afternoon, Eli hauled 2 spare pieces of plywood from the barn and set up a makeshift signpost. With red paint thick and wet, he wrote in big block letters, private property no parking, crops in ground do not enter. He propped one at the corner near the main road and the other farther down near the back fence. It wasn't elegant, but it made his message clear. By Sunday morning, the signs had been knocked over. One lay face down in the mud, the other kicked onto its side like trash. There were 10 cars now. Eli stood frozen at the edge of his field. He didn't even sip his coffee. His shoulders were rigid, jaw clenched. A part of him wanted to run up to each driver and demand answers, but what good would it do? Still, he had to try something. He crossed the road to Silvermart, the morning sun already heating the pavement. Inside, it was a swirl of noise and confusion, blaring announcements, squeaking carts, and a child wailing in aisle 4. He waited at the front counter until someone directed him to the store manager. The manager was a man in his 30s, clean-shaven and wearing a name tag that read Jeff Store Manager. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Good morning, Jeff said, trying to smile. What can I do for you? Eli didn't waste time. I own the land right across the road where your customers have been parking. That's private farmland, not overflow. Jeff's expression flickered. Ah, yes, we've had a few incidents reported. Incidents, Eli repeated. Is that what you call it when someone runs over an irrigation line? Jeff shifted uncomfortably. We've made several in-store announcements and we've asked employees not to park there. But unfortunately, we can't control where customers choose to leave their vehicles once they're off our property. You could put up cones, Eli offered, or signs, or have someone direct traffic. We've considered it, Jeff said, but honestly, we're understaffed and the parking expansion project hasn't been approved yet. So what you're saying is it's my problem. Jeff winced. I'm saying we sympathize. But legally, there's not much we can enforce beyond our own property lines. Eli stared at him. Your customers are trespassing and damaging land that's meant to feed people. I understand that, Jeff said, nodding. Really? We'll make another announcement today. Eli gave him a long, tired look. Eli turned and walked out without another word. He took a deep breath and walked toward the nearest car. A man was leaning into his back seat, buckling in a toddler. Hey there, Eli called. The man looked up annoyed. Yeah, you're parked on private property, Eli said. This is a working field. I'll be gone in a minute, the man said, not even pretending to apologize. You ran over a crop row, Eli said, pointing. The man glanced at the dirt. Didn't see anything there. Eli opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the house. When he reached the garden, Margaret was already waiting, kneeling near the tomatoes. Well, she asked. They don't care, Eli muttered. It's just easier to ignore me than walk an extra 30 feet from the other side of the road. You should call Rick. Rick was an old friend from school, a part-time lawyer who still took the occasional civil case for friends. Eli called him that evening. I hate to tell you this, Rick said after hearing the story, but unless you've got a fence or posted legal notice with consequences, there's not a lot you can do. It's your land, sure, but enforcement's tricky. Most of these people will just claim they didn't see a sign or didn't know, and honestly, going to court over it, not worth the time or money, so I should just let them root in my field. Eli snapped. I'm saying the law won't be on your side unless you spend more than you'll save. I wish I had better news. Eli ended the call and sat in silence for a long time. Margaret brought him a plate of warm pie and sat beside him on the porch steps. The sun was going down, casting orange shadows across the fields. What did Rick say? That the law's not going to help unless you can really afford it. She didn't answer. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and a robin hopping across the porch rail. By the following weekend, it wasn't just a few cars, it was a crowd. Eli stood at the edge of the field surveying what looked like a makeshift overflow parking lot. At least 20 cars, most of them with their tires sunk halfway into the mud, their noses pointing toward the supermarket like faithful dogs waiting for their owners. And then he saw it. A white crossover SUV had pulled so far in that it was now sitting squarely on the flower bed beside the house. Margaret's flower bed, the same one he'd helped her dig out by hand where the pink forget-me-nots had only recently begun to bloom. The tire tracks cut deep, slicing the soil like a blade. The stems were flattened, the petals had been crushed beneath rubber and weight. Eli felt something twist in his chest. Anger, yes, but more than that, a deep violation. This wasn't just about land anymore. Someone had trespassed on something sacred. Something beautiful and small and cared for. He walked back to the porch where Margaret sat quietly with a basket of herbs in her lap. They parked on the flower bed, he said. She looked up. Her eyes didn't widen, she didn't gasp, she just sat there, her hand frozen mid-reach. Then she lowered it into her lap. After a pause, she said, "We could let the animals loose." Eli blinked. "What? Let the chickens go, maybe the goats. Just let them wander around the cars. No one'll stick around if a few goats start climbing their windshields." Eli smiled faintly but shook his head. Too risky. What if someone hits one? What if they get hurt? Margaret said nothing more. She simply reached into her basket and began to sort the herbs again. Eli sat beside her, staring at the horizon, and then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. A plan had begun to form. Eli didn't sleep much that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow, rhythmic breaths of his wife beside him. His mind was turning over possibilities, refining details, weighing outcomes. By dawn, he had everything he needed: a clear head, an early start, and a simple plan rooted in common sense and poetic justice. He dressed quietly and sipped his coffee on the porch, watching the mist roll low over the fields. The flower bed remained crushed. The pink forget-me-nots now looked like damp tissue in the mud. That was the part that still stuck with him, not the cars, not the noise, not even the signs being torn down. It was the carelessness. He'd always believed that people might not be naturally good, but they could at least be considerate. These weren't starving families seeking refuge, they were shoppers who couldn't be bothered to walk an extra 30 seconds. By 8 a.m. he heard the first engines arrive. 1, then 3, then 6 vehicles rolled into his southern field like they had every right to it. People parked in sloppy rows, engines cooling as their owners disappeared into the Silver Mart. Eli waited. At 9:30 he started up his tractor. It wasn't one of those sleek modern machines. This was an old Massey Ferguson, sturdy and stubborn like Eli himself. He hitched the plow attachment to the back and eased it into gear, the engine grumbling to life like a waking bear. And then, with practiced hands, Eli drove straight into the field. Not over the cars, of course. He wasn't reckless. He plowed around them, tight circles of fresh earth curling in on all sides, creating deep furrows and thick uneven mounds of soil. He worked methodically, sculpting the land around each car like a baker icing a cake. Careful not to damage anything, but firm enough to make sure no one could just drive away without serious effort, or better yet, a tow truck. By the time the last furrow was cut, the field looked like a patchwork trap. The cars sat awkwardly in the middle of it all, boxed in by dirt, each one surrounded by loose, unstable soil too deep for a sedan or SUV to drive through without getting stuck. Eli killed the engine, climbed down, and began seeding the rest of the field like any other workday. One seed at a time, working row by row. That's when he heard the first voice. Hey, what the hell is this?" He turned slowly. A woman in high-heeled boots and a leather jacket was stomping across the field, fuming. Her face was red, her arms flailing with the kind of rage that comes not from injustice but from inconvenience. Eli didn't say anything. He bent over and dropped another handful of seed into the fresh soil. "Excuse me," the woman shouted. "You've trapped my car?" Eli straightened, dusted off his hands, and looked at her. "No, ma'am, I've planted my crop. Don't get smart with me. This is illegal. This is my land," he said evenly, "and it's planting season." She pointed wildly. "You've built a moat around my car?" "No, ma'am," he said again. "That's called a furrow, and in about a week it'll be corn." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I'm calling the police." Eli nodded. "You go right ahead." She turned on her heel, stomped back to her car and began furiously tapping at her phone screen. Eli returned to his work, humming softly. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, 2 cruisers from the local department. One officer was young and looked bewildered from the moment he stepped out. The other was Deputy Claire, someone Eli had known for years. She approached slowly, glancing over the field, then at the woman who was still yelling into her phone beside her stranded SUV. "Morning," Claire said. "Morning, Claire, can you tell me what's going on here?" Eli set his seed bag down and leaned on the tractor. "Plowing my field," he said, "just like every spring. Been on the calendar since January." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And the cars?" "Well," Eli said, scratching his chin, "they were already parked there when I came out. Didn't want to lose a planting day, so I worked around them." The younger officer stepped forward, clearly agitated. "Sir, you deliberately boxed these people in." "Not deliberately," Eli said, respectfully. "I respected their space. Didn't touch a single bumper." Claire bit back a smile. The woman stormed over again. "This man is insane. He trapped me in the middle of a cornfield." Claire held up a hand. "Ma'am, are you aware this is private property?" The woman faltered. "Well, I mean, it wasn't marked." "Actually," Eli said, "it was. 2 signs. They're over there in the ditch where someone tossed them." The younger officer walked over to retrieve the plywood signs, now caked in mud but still clearly legible. Claire sighed. "All right. Everyone parked here is getting cited for trespassing and illegal parking on private agricultural land. If you'd like to file a complaint, you're welcome to do so downtown." The woman exploded. "This is outrageous. I'm going to go viral with this." Claire nodded. "You might. That tends to happen when people film other people doing the right thing." Eli tipped his hat and went back to planting. By late afternoon, someone did post a video. It showed Eli calmly seeding his crops while a group of angry shoppers stood stranded beside their trapped cars. The caption read, "Farmer gets his epic revenge on people parking illegally in his field." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Eli didn't care much for social media, but Margaret read in the comments that evening, "This man is a hero. We need more Eli Bowers in this world. Play stupid games, park in stupid places, get harvested." Eli just nodded quietly, sipping his tea. "Maybe next year we plant sunflowers." Margaret smiled. "Let's do it." Spring turned to summer and Eli's field bloomed without interruption. Not a single car had parked in it since the incident, as folks in town had started calling it. The story had gone far beyond the county. News crews showed up for a few days hoping to get a comment from the revenge farmer. Eli declined interviews, though Margaret let one polite reporter take a photo of the forget-me-nots that had begun to bloom again in the restored flower bed. He didn't need attention. He had his land back. That was enough. Still, he had to admit there was a certain satisfaction in the way people looked at him now. At the farmer's market, someone always mentioned it. "You're the guy who boxed in those shoppers, right?" Or, "That video got me through a bad week, thank you." One man even shook Eli's hand and said it was the best thing I've seen all year. Eli took it all in stride. He wasn't in it for glory. But he did buy a new sign, professionally made this time, mounted on a steel post at the corner of his property. "Private farmland, no parking, trespassers will be plowed around." Again, it had a small image of a tractor beneath the text. Margaret called it modern art. The Silvermart eventually responded to the whole fiasco by expanding their lot. Construction crews came in one weekend and cleared the back section of their property to make room for 20 more spaces. That seemed to fix the overflow problem for good. But even with plenty of parking now, no one dared to test their luck again by crossing Eli's boundary. The field where the cars had once sat was thriving. Corn stalks rose tall and green, stretching toward the sky like nothing had ever gone wrong. Between the rows, sprigs of wildflower dotted the borders, planted by Margaret in quiet tribute to the damage that had once been done. One evening, just after sundown, Eli and Margaret sat on their porch watching the wind move through the field like a soft wave. The pink forget-me-not swayed near the base of the porch steps, freshly watered. "You know," Margaret said, "you've become a bit of a folk legend." Eli grunted. "People keep asking if you're going to do it again next year." "Do what?" "Grow corn." She smiled. "Box people in again?" He shook his head. "I hope I never have to." That wasn't farming, that was babysitting adults. They sat in companionable silence for a few more minutes. Somewhere in the distance, a cricket began chirping. "I'm glad we didn't let them ruin it," Margaret said softly. "Not just the field, the way we live." Eli reached over and took her hand. They didn't even come close. On the first day of the next planting season, Eli stood by the edge of his field once again. The air was cool, the sky pale with morning light, and the soil beneath his boots was soft but ready. He adjusted his gloves, took one slow breath, and started walking. There were no cars in sight, just earth and peace and work to be done.